Lynn Cullen live in 1 minute. Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live at pghcitypaper.com. Email your questions and comments to Lynn at pghcitypaper.com.
Okay, here we go. Hi, Friday. Oh, is it Friday? Yes, it is. It's Friday. Oh, thank God. Friday. It, in fact, is June the 7th. And while I know there's lots of news that people are very, very concerned about, we have a wonderful guest scheduled, and a guest in large part that was a result of you guys saying, I want to hear more from that woman. That woman is this woman, and in fact, she called the show. Beware of calling the show.
Yes.
Yeah. See what happens? It's happened to other people before you, too. Beware of calling the show and being such a compelling caller that I get emails saying, have that woman on. I wanted to hear more. Now, just to refresh your memory, it was a Tuesday, and my sister was on with me, and we were talking. Susan brought up this controversy over the DSM-5, which is Diagnostic
and Statistical Manual of Mental Disease.
Okay.
And this is the 5th revision coming up.
Okay. And this, by the way, now that you're actually talking, is Barbara Coyne. She is our guest. But so we're talking about this and the fact, and then I'm not sure. We were talking about, I can't remember what happened exactly, but what did happen that you came in and we were talking about grief?
Susan was talking about how we are pathologizing grief. In the medical model, that the DSM-5 is including grief now in that manual, in the DSM-5.
Well, wait. So what's in the DSM-5 is also things like, I suppose schizophrenia or something. And grief is in a... Grief is in there with schizophrenia? Wait a minute.
Well, that says something, doesn't it? It says that just the mere fact that grief, the most human of human conditions, is included in a book on mental diseases.
What the heck is going on with us?
Well, we are overtaken by the medical model. In everything we do, we are overtaken by the medical model. And the medical model has, for the past 4 decades at least or more, succumbed to a medical model. The famous stages that people may not know by that name, but they know that these are the stages.
Yeah, we know the stages of grief, right? I mean, we all have heard that. There's something like called, you don't accept it. That's denial, right? And then there's
No, denial means that you are not confronting the truth of your situation.
Oh, okay.
Now, there is a concept in psychiatry called denial, and I'm not disputing that.
Yeah.
But the denial that we see, that is called denial in grief, is usually associated with that first impulse that when people hear that someone is dead, it is now over, it's dead.
You can't
and their
accept it.
first impulse is, oh no.
Right.
That's what's being called denial.
Okay.
But what I call that is a flash of knowing. You, in a flash, look down that long street without this person, and you know that your life is forever changed.
Yeah.
That's not denial.
No, in fact, it seems to me a pretty good observation and definition of what just happened.
Yeah, I call it a flash of knowing.
Okay.
It is a kind of all at once knowing. Oh my God! Because the next thing people say is, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do without this person? We always did. We always went. I always." And they know that. That's why I have called that a flash of knowing. It is an immediate, almost awareness.
I'll tell you what. This woman, this is what she does. She lectures. She does what groups in which you help people who are dealing with grief, and she's got it all in a nice little book. How did you guys know that this caller, of course, had put it all in a little book? And it's, you don't have to like it, but you do have to live it. And the little fine print is conversations about loss, grief, and the opportunity to grow. This is, it doesn't appear to be, but in some ways it's a bit of a radical book because it does poke a finger in the eye of this sense that grief is something that needs to be medicalized, needs to be
medicated,
gotten rid of, and needs to be gotten through, needs to, blah, 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 whatever. Because this one says grief is a gift. And that's radical. And that is what that call was. You were saying grief was a gift. And what you said, because obviously she said more than that, resonated so with all of us. I mean, I don't know that anyone could have heard that and not had a moment where they thought, oh, my heavens. It's a totally different way of looking at it.
Totally different way.
And I have to tell you, it's a much more helpful way. It is so much more helpful. Now, this is the kind of subject that I don't usually do on this show because we don't. I mean, that's what I don't do mostly. So for those of you who say, wait a minute, I come here to talk about pop, stick with me because there's not a one of us who has not or who will not deal with
grief
and the loss of someone, something that is. This works for things too, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah, that is so integral a part of our lives that we don't know how we're going to go on without it.
We are connected to people, to animals, and to things. And when any of those connections is changed, either through death or losing a house, losing a job, any of those, we are inundated with loss from the moment we're born until the moment we die. And because loss is so pervasive in our lives, throughout our lives.
It's part of being alive.
It is part of being alive.
Yeah.
And it is for that reason that I call grief a gift. The universe does not throw us out into this world of chaos and not give us something to prepare us to get through it. And by the way, we do get through grief. What we don't do is get over it. We get through it. And I like the old kind of African aphorism that says, the only way out of the desert is through it.
That's true.
And it is the way we must navigate through our grief. So when those connections are changed in any way, we go back to this gift that is that internal healer. Our ancient healers used to call that then and now the wisdom of the body. The healer that knows how to heal itself.
So we already have all this information. It's right inside.
We do.
But we don't maybe have access to it because there's a lot of din out there telling us things like get over it, or you should be beyond this denial into acceptance.
That's right.
Or you shouldn't be so angry anymore.
Right.
I mean, come on, blah,
That's
blah,
time.
blah. It's been
It's
2 years. Give me a break.
2 years. The DSM now is saying a month.
What?
A month. The DSM-5, if you have not stopped your crying and your weeping,
What?
in a month, you can be diagnosed with clinical depression. And of course, guess what you get with clinical depression?
Medicine.
The pharmaceutical industry loves that. Loves that. So, yeah, we have that, but we don't always have access to everything that we know.
No,
we don't always have access to that. But the other problem, see, what grief gives us is the opportunity, as I say, the opportunity to grow by touching that pain and interrogating the pain and letting it speak to us and to heal us. But what else has happened is that, see, let me back up 1 minute. The nature of grief has not changed. Grief is now what it was thousands of years ago.
Sure.
We have known grief throughout the history of pre-recorded human history, and before that through the oral traditions.
Well, I don't think anyone would doubt. I even think animals grieve. So, I mean,
Indeed.
yeah, no, it's just part natural.
Indeed, they do.
Okay.
It is a natural response to loss.
Yeah.
And when some 40 years ago, the ascendancy of the biotechnical model in medicine became just simply overwhelming, and it cast an umbrella over all of our lives, everything. You know, if you are eating too much ice cream, people say you're in denial. We are in denial about everything. We don't accept anything. We are angry.
A kid is rambunctious. Medicate him. A kid. I mean, we just. You're right. Everything has been. Our very nature has been deemed a disease, I guess.
That's right.
Because the pharmaceutical company. I mean, it's not like they sit down and do they actually sit down and think this? It's just their business is to make money selling drugs. They happily come up with drugs to help people. They probably are the best intentioned.
Well, that's why we're going to call it clinical depression. They're saying we're not medicating grief. We're medicating clinical depression. Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
You know, I consider my mother to be the most emotionally healthy human being I have ever encountered. And a lot of people who know her would say the same. And she had an incredible marriage of well over 60 years. And when my dad died 5 years ago now, watching her get her feet back under her has been a great lesson. I was just with her, and we both cried.
Sure.
About him.
5 years?
We started talking about him, and we both said, "Oh, that wonderful man." And my mom said, "I miss him so." Yes, right?
Gotta
never stop.
Of course not.
Never stop.
See, what I say about that, Lynn, is that grief is over, but it's never over. I talk a lot in convoluted, what appear to be convoluted, but what I mean by grief is over is that early chaotic confusion and disorientation and sadness and pain and can't focus and can't think and can't sleep and can't, all of that eventually ends. Grief is over in that way. It is never over because I'm going to go back to we are connected to animals, to people, and to things. And when that connection is changed, we then have to move beyond wanting them in the physical presence of wanting to touch them and talk to them and look at them and be with them. We have to move from that to the connection that is now a spiritual one, which incidentally is really what our connection really is.
Of course.
That
it's
is
not
always
with those corporeal the body.
Sure.
Once the body is gone, it's not like they're gone. They are part of us there. So there's so much more.
But even when they are alive, what we connect with is the essence of the person.
That's right.
See, and
not the physical.
When I say that to people, I say, tell me about your husband. Tell me what. Well, he was the greatest guy. He made me laugh. He was funny. Oh, you didn't tell me he was 5'7" and
right. That's
not what they say.
That's
so
not
we
what
are
it is.
always connecting to that essence,
right.
but we connect to it through the body.
And what would you think about a person, again, my mother, who will still get teary and say about her parents? She's 90. She is 90.
Yes.
Almost 91.
Yes.
Oh, my dad, my sweet dad. What a...
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
See, all of any loss that we incur in the present, the experience of that always touches other losses, brings back all of them. That's the beauty and the gift of grief, because in remembering your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and tying that to you and your children and your grandchildren and what's going on in your life now is what enriches our life. It is what makes life worth
That's
living.
right. It's the web that, yes, it's the warp and the woof.
See, what I talk about is that grief does, in that never over part of grief, it becomes, like everything else we experience, a part of our history. And we do not forget our history. It is from our history that we write, if you will, our living autobiography. And it is out of that history that we do that. But what we must be careful of is that we do not make grief our identity.
Here, and I think we all probably know somebody.
Oh, I have them every day.
Gosh.
I can tell you a 55-year-old woman who came to me for the express purpose of how could she help her mother. Her dad died when she was 5, 50 years. And she said to me, all my life, my mother introduces herself as, hi, I am so-and-so, a widow of 50 years.
Oh, my God. So that's absolutely her identity.
That is her identity.
And she was proud of it, it sounds like.
Well,
No?
she liked being that attention that she got. See, and we do that. Many of our groups do that. My support groups do not do that. I do not, I let them tell their story, and I describe grief as a well-written story. That is what it is, a well-written story. But they don't go round and round and round like a kind of grief Groundhog Day.
You never. Right, that's great. Yeah. So you're not moving. You're
must. That's why I say you must
and you
move
got to break out of
through
it at some point.
You
Okay,
must
through it.
go. You get out of the desert of your grief by going through it. We get to our joy through our pain.
Ansel has written, I'm sorry, but I didn't catch your guest's name. I know, I did it so... Her name is, I said Barbara Coyne, but in fact,
Yes.
I don't know if this gets you in
It's
trouble
A.
if you
Barbara,
Google.
but I go by Barbara.
All right, you.
A.
What's the A for? Come on. You're not going to tell me? I'll
No.
tell you mine.
I know yours.
Ah! Jeez. I got a letter, too. Lynn Cullen, but
My A is Aurora.
Oh, dear Lord. Well, that's sort of beautiful, isn't it?
It is. Yes, it is.
Aurora.
Yes.
So, A. Barbara Coyne, Coyne. It's a good Irish name. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That doesn't mean I'm Irish.
No, it means your dear husband was Irish. A. Barbara Coyne. And the book is You Don't Have to Like It, but You Do Have to Live It. Where do people get it?
On my website, barbaracoyne.com.
Not A. Barbara Coyne?
No.
Okay. Barbara Coyne, Coyne.com. And let's get a little about you. He wants to know about your background
Sure.
because that is important.
Sure.
Tell us how you came to this.
Sure. I am a nurse. I am an educator. I am a bereavement counselor.
You were a nursing professor? Yeah.
At 5 different universities in 3 different states. And above all, I am a human being who has known the pervasiveness of loss. And because my background was in that medical model, I knew that there was something not quite right about that. I watched people suffering in my major areas were psychiatric and then critical care. And I watched these people in critical care, the person and the family who stood there apart from that bed, afraid to touch the person, looking at all of these tubes and wondering, where is the person in all this? And it was very easy, as I watched what was going on in critical care units, it was very easy to subordinate the suffering of that person and the family to the technology.
Yeah.
And so the humanness got kind of got trampled. And I thought, there's got to be a better way to do this. And so I went back then. I have a PhD. I have 2 master's degrees and a PhD. And I went back to my favorite, which is philosophy and literature. And it is in those 2 places that I found for me a better way to think about and to get through grief.
Speaking of literature, that explains why your book
is full of
literary.
Yes.
And you've pulled out such wonderful ones.
Yes.
Why this one? Why this? This is one of those old Chinese proverb. Smart. The beginning of wisdom is to call things by their right names.
Oh, that one is so important.
How does that come in?
Because language is my other favorite, because words have the power to frame how we think about something.
Okay.
And if we think about grief in the medical model, then our expectations of the outcome are the medical model. I also referred to one of my favorite, Mark Twain.
Oh, I love him.
Well, then you probably read that one where he says about words, the difference between the right word and the not quite right word is like the difference between lightning and a lightning bug.
Right, exactly.
And it occurred to me that we are calling grief a lightning bug. And it's lightning.
We got the wrong word, and you end up lost when you go that way.
If we use the words of the medical model, we expect the results of the medical model. The words of the medical model are diagnosis, cure, symptoms, management, cure, recovery. So when we talk about grief recovery, which I don't talk about, we don't recover from grief.
We live with it.
We learn to live with the changes that happen as a result of it. Yeah. We recover from the flu, and we get over our gallbladder surgery. We learn to live with the changes that happen to us, because someone that we have been connected with is gone.
Yeah, they're physically
gone. So words are. And the other thing that has heavily influenced, 2 traditions that have heavily influenced grief. One is that dualistic model, the philosophical Cartesian dualism. My wonderful René Descartes, who very clearly said, I think, therefore I am. That's the major problem. It's called the cogito. He said, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Who am I? Am I a thinking person or a feeling person? Because it is the either or. He followed that statement, I think, therefore I am. He followed that statement by saying, feelings are there, feelings and senses are there, but they are irrelevant.
What?
Yeah. Well, think about this, Lynn.
I think. So he only took that?
Well, you see, you have to, I loved Rene Descartes. He's one of the ones I love to hate because I'm an educator. I know about the logic of research. He was 17th century. He was trying to get people out of that place of myth and
magical
this little,
thinking and all
this
stuff.
little god and that little god, and he was trying to get people thinking. But he followed that with
He went too far.
Your feelings and at the same time that philosophers were saying there is more to us than our head. But we grabbed onto that. And you know that there are people who will say to you today, I don't care what you feel. Tell me what you think. So what I talk about is thoughts, feelings, sensations, hyphenated. I never talk about one. It is the concept of those three altogether that create a very different perspective about how we think about and get through grief.
All right. She asked me how long we were going to go. I'll tell you right now, we're going an hour. And I need to take a break. I'm seeing some of your emails and questions. We'll get to all of them, I promise. My guest is Barbara Coyne. Her book, You Don't Have to Like It, but You Do Have to Live It, is available at her website, BarbaraCoyne, COYNE.com. We'll be back in a minute.
Email your questions and comments to Lynn at pghcitypaper.com or call Lynn at 412-316-3381. Lynn Cullen Live will return in a moment.
This week's Pittsburgh City Paper is available now. Pick up one today for information on the Three Rivers Arts Festival, plus Tracy Morgan, Passion Pit, Drowning Pool, Shaka Khan, and News of the Weird. Pittsburgh City Paper available at over 1,700 locations throughout Western Pennsylvania and on the web at pghcitypaper.com and on your smartphone with GPS-enabled listings at citypapermobile.com.
This is the sound of a flat-screen television hurled off a building. Now the new bike your kid wants. These are the things you could have, all cast into oblivion. Because when you throw away money on wasted electricity, you throw away everything you could have bought with it. Use Energy Star light bulbs and appliances, and you could save hundreds of dollars a year. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Energy and the Ad Council.
Now, it's back to Lynn Cullen Live at pghcitypaper.com.
And then pick up every one.
Hang on. It's great, too. Wow. Barbara Coyne, my guest, author of You Don't Have to Like It, but You Do Have to Live It. She's an educator, a nurse, and, in fact, a grief counselor and lecturer. This from Ray. I'd be interested to hear your guest's opinion of the Buddhist parable of the woman who would not give up her dead child to be buried. Her grief was too strong. She was sent to the Buddha, who told her he could raise the child. She only needed to gather grains of rice from all the homes where no one had died. She was jubilant. The next day, she gave her child over to the Buddha because she realized that all the houses she had visited had suffered her same loss. And Ray said that little story has helped him. And you were just saying to me that it's a wonderful story, and that these stories, there's a lot of cultures that have a story like
most cultures, most religions.
You were just talking about the woman who went to the rabbi.
Yeah.
I can't do it. I can't bear this grief.
I cannot get through. I can't get over this grief. And he told her to open a feather pillow, and scatter the pillows out the window, and to a high window, and then to gather all of those and figure out how many of those had not experienced grief. Now, I think that there is both there's both good and bad to that. Because what we are saying is don't focus on your grief.
And you don't, do you agree with that? What do you mean?
No, I do not.
No,
I do not. But what we must do, and what I do with these parables, with these, my book is full of those, and I may start that when I'm talking with a person. You're not the only one. Grief is ubiquitous in our lives. However, then we have to look at what's going on in her life or his life.
That's right. And you talk a lot about how every death, every loss is unique, right?
Every loss is unique.
You cannot say
every loss is unique.
Your mom or your father died. He was 97.
That's right.
There's no reason to grieve. Right. You should just celebrate his life, blah, blah, blah. And, if a child dies, that we understand is debilitating. And you're saying, you can't rank them?
No, absolutely. We don't. See, what I say in my book is let's not compare deaths. Let's compare our taste in ice cream. But let us not compare deaths. But we in the caregiving world do that. We have support groups for every little one. We have Widows Only. Theos was one of the first I became involved with. No widow understands grief unless she has been a widow. Oh, please.
You say that's baloney?
That's baloney. So we have groups. We even separated widows and widowers and we have. We know that there are separate groups for people who have experienced the loss of a child. My groups, everybody's welcome. The distinction is that I do not take kids under 18 because children grieve in very different ways. But I put them all together. See, I don't separate people according to who died. We have much to learn from each other. Every death is different. See, what I see happening now in these groups that have separated people is they begin to separate themselves out within the group with that wonderful phrase, at least. Well, at least you had your spouse. My husband died suddenly, or at least you were able to be with your child, or at least. So we keep separating into smaller and smaller, tiny little circles, and we do enter that grief Groundhog Day.
And keep going in circles.
And keep going in groups.
Henry, great remark. Henry says, Lynn, the next time we read about a college or university slashing the literature department or philosophy department from their budgets, I think we need to introduce them to Barbara. Clearly, her studies in these areas have given her a perspective on grief that we don't hear anywhere else.
Oh, Henry.
Henry, yeah.
I love you dearly.
Yeah, nailed it.
Because it is the bane of my existence, what we have done in the liberal arts to slash the philosophy, the literature, the arts. It is the sadness of my academic career that I have watched that happen.
It's just... Yeah. Don't get me started. Okay, so you were working in Chicago when another woman who is famous and now deceased was working, and that would be Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Ah, yes.
And she was a psychiatrist.
Ah, yes.
And she was, I remember when, her book came out, and she was heralded as, what a breakthrough kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
Okay, now so talk to me about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the good she did, and then the unintended consequence, I guess, of what
yes.
of her work.
And I do
give her due.
I do give her due in my book, but I respectfully disagree. What she did I was teaching at Loyola University in Chicago. She was at the University of Chicago as a psychiatrist. I was teaching a course in oncology and talking about the end that sometimes happens with people who have cancer. And in that course, I always brought in a panel of spiritual and or religious. The minister who came to me out of the University of Chicago. His name was Carl Neiswanger. And after my group, we sat and talked, and he told me about this woman who was doing this study at the University of Chicago. Her name was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a psychiatrist. But how she came to be involved with that is an interesting backstory, as the saying goes. Carl Neiswanger was doing a very different kind of procedure. He was a minister. He wanted his minister students to learn how to be with people who were sick and dying in a hospital. But he couldn't find anybody in this grand University of Chicago hospitals who was dying. Nobody was dying. Any doctor he went to, 600 patients in
Speak
this.
of denial.
Yes. And so he finally decided that if he could enlist a doctor to work with him, and the doctor who finally said yes, she would, was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. But somewhere along the line, the intent of that study changed. What he was looking to do was to help his ministers sit and be with people who were dying. What she did was make it an interview with people who were dying.
She was gathering information.
She was gathering information.
She was a researcher. Okay.
So she interviewed some 100 or more people who were dying. Saw a pattern, and this is what she saw. But when we create patterns, we always create them from the background in which we have been taught. She's a physician. She is a medical model steeped in 2.5 centuries of logical positivism, in which the only proof, if you will, of statements is through logic and mathematics.
Right.
Well, the human condition doesn't respond to that. But that's how
a little messier.
It's a lot messier. But that's how we came to those 5 stages. And now,
and in case we forgot those 5 stages, we've incorporated them.
Sure.
As a culture.
Sure.
They are, because I
they
are
up on them. Denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and finally, acceptance.
Yay!
And what I say is there is no denial. We can be as angry as we want. Our feelings are not under our control. It is, I say, at the intersection of choice and circumstance that we learn a very important lesson: the difference between being in control and taking charge.
Oh, you're going to have to embellish this.
We are in control of very little.
Yeah.
We can take charge of a great deal.
Yes.
For example, one of the things I think I quote in my book, maybe not, is a woman who says, we cannot control the wind, but we can set the sails.
Ha! There it is. Woo!
Well,
that's a good one.
And that is, we cannot control what happens to us. People die. The people with whom we are connected die. People, animals, and things with whom we are connected die. We cannot control that, but we can take charge of how we will get through that process. And how we get through it is through the willingly but reluctantly engagement with the work of grief. And we haven't even touched on that, Lynn.
Oh, dear Lord. Okay, I was paging through something, and then we'll get into the work of grief after the next break. Uncompensated. Yeah, you can. Well, not in a financial sense, but it's volunteer work. Barbara Coyne, my guest. You don't have to like it, but you do have to live it. The book, available at her website, Barbara Coyne, COYNE.com. I was looking for the Seneca quote.
It's which one though? Because there are a couple of Seneca quotes.
The first one.
It is the one where I talk about my husband. So it would be.
So
the one.
Barbara is a widow. She and that loss informs a lot in the book. But all of her, here it is, Seneca. I thought he was an Indian chief, but then that's how he... Okay, well, there is. I know, and I thought, geez, Seneca said that. No,
this is Seneca. Philosopher.
He's a philosopher from a long time ago. The final hour when we cease to exist does not itself bring death. It merely completes the death process. We reach death at that moment, but we have been a long time on the way. Now that's like one of the first. That's the first quote I think in your book. Why that one? Why?
Well,
so powerful about that?
First of all, it is one of my husband's favorite, and it speaks to the process of what I call becoming dead. That's what Seneca is talking about. We don't just kind of live and go along our lives and then all of a sudden we die. We become what is called dead. That's what he's talking about. At the time of our death, we complete the death process, but we've been a long time getting there.
Okay. Well, since birth.
Since birth. And that length of time intensifies if you are dealing with someone with a chronic illness. But that was one of my husband's favorite. My husband and I always talked about
this kind of
thing. And the title of that book is also because of my husband. But it comes more from the people who would come into my office, literally collapse into a chair and say, I hate this.
Or I can't do this.
And I would say to them, but you don't have to like it. But you do have to live it, so let us find some ways to do that. And as I say in the book, when I talk about the title, I would say this to my husband. I said, it is like they think they really have to like what's happening. And he said, in his Irish humor way, always, hey, sounds like the title of a book.
Huh.
It became that.
Wow.
But it is that's the first thing, and I guarantee you, that's one of the first things people say. They simply collapse in a chair and say, I hate this. Yeah. I hate this. And I'm never going to get over this. And I say to them, you don't have to like it, but you do have to live it. And you're right, you will never get over it.
No.
But you will get through it. And I begin to set the frame of a different language, a different way of thinking.
Well, my wise old mom always just says to me, just keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Yes. Yes.
It's simple as that. Keep moving.
Yes.
She means that literally and figuratively. Okay, we're going to take our second break. When we come back, we'll hear about the work of grief. After this.
More is on the way with Lynn Cullen Live.
Go to BergBargains.com for great deals on gift cards from your favorite local restaurants, bars, museums, attractions, and shows. This week, great deals on tickets to the Pittsburgh Irish and Classical Theater. Supplies are limited. BergBargains.com, Pittsburgh's best bargains. BergBargains.com.
Do you know that haunting Beethoven masterpiece that so inflames the passions as to be, well, dangerous to those who hear it, and dare I say, deadly to those who play it? I'm Martin Giles, starring in Picht's next play, The Kreutzer Sonata, by Nancy Harris, based on Tolstoy's scandalous novella. Join me for a thrilling train ride at the Henry Hayman Theatre in Oakland from May 30th through June 22nd. Visit pichttheatre.org for tickets and information.
Have a question or an opinion? Call Lynn Cullen at 412-316-3381 or email lynn@pghcitypaper.com. Now, more with Lynn Cullen Live.
All right, we are back with A. Barbara Coyne, whose book I am paging through, just looking for another wondrous quote. I mean, they're just... you don't have to like it, but you do have to live it. This is the part I don't like, the work of grief. Okay. So...
Well... unfortunately, nobody likes it.
I guess
and you don't have to like it, but you do have to live it. The work of grief is not the same thing as the psychoanalytic working through our issues. The work of grief has to do, first of all, with the meaning of work.
Okay.
Work has to do with using energy to get a job done. You know, when you go to work and you file or you do whatever you do, you're using energy. That automatically says something. You're tired. One of the most frequent things we see in grief is exhaustion. Exhaustion. Why? Because they're working, they're doing their housework, their office work, they're running after kids, and now they are using energy to heal the pain of loss. So what is that thing that we're doing? I talk about three things. Two crucial ones, and finally the resolution. The first thing I've talked a lot about, we are connected to people, to animals, and to things. When someone dies, then we have to disconnect from the physical presence of them while simultaneously connecting to the essence of the person, which is what we will forever carry with us.
You don't let that go.
You don't let that go.
That is not lost.
That is not lost.
Right.
But it takes us a long time to come to that. And I use some different ways of helping people to do that. Telling their story is certainly one of them. Writing about it. See, in the work of grief, what we're talking about is the experience and the expression of grief. We talk about what we experience and then how we express it. And we can't get those, we confuse what and how in our system of language. What is a definition? How is getting through it. So the how of that disconnecting is through expressing the pain of the grief. We talk about it with others in a group, with counselors, with friends, with family. We write about it. We can keep a journal. We can go to the cemetery and talk to the person. Some people write letters to the dead person, bring them to the cemetery, and read them to the person. One of the things that people don't think about, and I would like to emphasize in the few minutes or whatever time we have, is that one of the ways we must express our grief is through motion and movement. I have a paper on my website. There are a lot of papers that people can get to read on my website, by the way. They can go to the archives and read those. One of them has to do with movement and the expression of grief. And what I say in that paper is I talk about the cocoon of grief. We tend to close ourselves in. And it is a kind of recreating nature's protective amniotic sac, the chrysalis of the butterfly.
But a cocoon opens. Right.
But what we have to do is struggle to get through that.
Yeah.
And that's, that we do. One of the funeral directors that I work with offers now a yoga for people in grief. Wow. And I encourage people to do that. Saying, get up off your couch. I know you don't want to do that, but you get up off your couch, you go outside, you walk one house up and back, and then the next day you walk two, and you keep on.
So that's the literal put one foot in front of the
That's
other.
the literal. And I have a million little things that
And that actually does then
Oh, absolutely.
translate to...
Absolutely. It is that expression. See, that is the gift, the healing that we know how to do. That is why people weep and wail and scream, because it is the expression of what you are experiencing that is the healing thing.
Yeah.
That's what heals. So people say to me, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cry." And I say, crying is good. Crying is good, because what we experience, see, let me go back and say, grief is not a sickness.
Yeah.
But, there's a but. There's always a but in life. I said that's going to be my next book. Pay
There's
attention.
always a but.
See, the but is that while grief is not a sickness, it can contribute to making us sick.
Yes.
And if we are already struggling with diabetes or hypertension or clinical depression,
Yes.
it will make it worse. How does it do that? It does that by keeping in all of the energy, that power of the energy of grief in here. We have to let it out. That's why I talk about the experience of grief and the expression of grief. And one of those, all of those ways that I've said, writing about it, talking about it, crying about it, and also movement.
Okay, so the reality is that grief not expressed can, in fact, make you sick.
Contribute. It won't it doesn't cause you to be sick, but it can
I mean, the
contribute.
physical stuff that's going on, it can lower your immune system,
Absolutely.
all this kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
And it's not unusual to hear of somebody, I mean, what we used to say, dying of grief.
No, it is not unusual.
No.
It is also not unusual, and I warn my people in my groups, for example, and my practice, to have somebody coming to the group and then they don't show up for a month, and when they come back, they say, "You were right, I wound up in an emergency room," because I say to them, if you do not express that energy, you will wind up in an emergency room with chest pain or headaches. And what's interesting, of course, is that in the emergency room, they go through all of these tests, and then in comes Doc, and he says,
"There's nothing wrong with
it's
you."
it's, get this, just your grief.
It's just your
We minimize the,
Okay, I want this is a little bit off, but one of the things that I notice is how uncomfortable so many of us are in talking to, being with someone who is either dying or grieving. We don't know
that's right.
what to say. We don't know what's right. We don't know what's wrong. And some just remove themselves because they don't know what to do.
Right.
And okay, so what's your advice to those of us who are not grieving but have some?
I have something in there that I say to people who are with someone who is in grief. And what I say to people is, you have to tolerate your own pain as you extend yourself to the pain of others. Your pain won't kill you. Tolerate your pain and extend yourself. See, that healer that we all have that. And if we rely on that, what we do with others who are in grief, either witnessing, bearing witness to someone dying or already grieving, see, we inherently know what to say. We say to them, fight the good fight, and I will be with you every step of the way, right? Because we're saying two things. Tap into that source, and I will tap into mine, and together we will fight this thing. But you, the one who is out here, must tolerate your own pain. Now, in the questions section, I have a question that someone asks about that, about her husband died in a particular hospital room, and now she has a friend, her very dearest friend, who is in that room. Should she make herself go? Well, I never tell people, yes, you do, or no, you don't. But I give her the advantages and disadvantages of both. That's a loaded question in there, and a really, really...
Yes. Well, okay. But more, it seems like it's better often not to say anything. But just,
well, see, I think we sometimes say too much.
Yeah, we need to listen more than we need to talk.
I think we need to listen and be and stop doing. There isn't... See, the thing we want to do is lift the burden of pain off that person, but we can't do that. And it is, once again, that place of where we are at the intersection of choice and circumstance. What we want is to take that pain away. We can't do that. We can't do that. One of my other wonderful philosophers, Heidegger, who talks about suffering, says we can be one of two ways with suffering. And let us say we have someone approaching us with this really, really heavy load on his shoulders. And we can go to this person and lift that off his back. But there's another way. We can walk silently beside him and bear witness to the pain that he carries. We walk silently beside those who are in pain, and in that way we help them to bear the burden. When we bear witness, we help them to bear the burden.
Wow. There's a philosopher again. Chuck writes, for those of us who are not grieving, you would think today's topic would be uninteresting or a downer. I am shocked that I am so focused today on a topic and guest that would normally cause me to reach for the dial and change the station. I'm thinking her book would be good preparation for the inevitable. That's what I was thinking when I was reading it. I was thinking, this is not something... I even think this is something good for those of us who are not currently...
Absolutely.
in grief.
I say that in the book, Lynn. I say this is a book about living.
Exactly.
The reason I talk about post-death grief is because it is what we have studied most, written about most, and know most about. It is what we attribute grief to. But that is a book about living. It is about losing your home. In the group the other night, Wednesday night, I did a group, and there was a woman there came for the first time. And I always set a frame for my groups before they begin to tell their story. And I talk about grief is not a sickness. It is what we do with every loss, any loss, not just death.
Yeah.
This little voice piped up and said, like having lost your job in January? I said, yeah, like that.
Exactly.
Like
right.
that. See, so this is a book about living. The reason, and I make that very clear in the book, because loss is pervasive throughout our lives. Throughout our lives. And because of that, we have been given this gift of grief, that internal healer that guides us through our sea of loss.
What about the guilt that the griever can feel for all kinds of reasons?
Mm-hmm.
All the things they didn't do, or the regrets, or, and I think you do bring this up, or a sense of almost relief.
Oh, yes, both of those. Both of those. And then they feel guilt and shame.
Shame, all of it.
Yes.
I mean, that they're not feeling the right stuff.
Yes.
And, okay, so how do you...
well, that's why I talk about thoughts, feelings, sensations, and I talk about the gift of grief giving you the opportunity to look at that. Don't hide from those feelings. See, because that's what we want to do. We want to.
Because they're so shameful.
Well, see, but that's what we learn. That's how we learn, Lynn. That's how we learn. See, and that's what people want to do. Oh, don't feel guilty. You were so great to your mother. I have a story that is haunting. A woman who was a caregiver, whose mother was an invalid for 15 years. And this woman cared for her mother. She worked all day and had people in the home, but she was there at night. Now, she gave her mother one of those little bells.
To ring if she needed her.
And the mother would ring that bell 3 and 4 times, and every night she would get up and change the bed or get her a drink. Now, one night, this woman was so exhausted, she said to me, I pulled the covers over my head and I just ignored that bell. Well, you know what's coming, don't you? In the morning,
her mother was gone.
Her mother was dead. Her mother was dead. Now, what this woman, see, the bottom line of what we do when we interrogate all of those thoughts and feelings and sensations, what we finally come to is that we are human. And that means we are not now, never were, and never will be perfect. Yeah. And so we have to live with that terrible pain.
And what, forgive ourselves? Is that what you do?
Well, that's a word I don't ever use either. That's a topic of another show. That's not a word I use because that word, I read a book called Sunflower. Oh, you would love that book.
Okay.
It is about the Nazi Holocaust, and you would love that book. When I read that book, it is about forgiveness, and having been raised a Catholic and knowing the confessional and the profound nature of forgiveness, that's not a term I use lightly, and we use it too lightly. Oh, you have to forgive and forget. There is no forgetting, and forgiveness, that's too sacred a concept. I don't use it.
Oh, wow.
I don't use it. So I tell people, you have to come to terms with this. Forgive? Well,
okay, well, now that's interesting to me.
That's another whole story. The Sunflower is one of my very all-time favorite books. Well, I probably have 2 million books that are my all-time favorite books. But that one truly spoke to me in terms of that concept of forgiveness. But the other part of the work of grief is, here we go with that convoluted, coming to believe what we already know.
No.
Yep. And I call that closing the gap, the knowing, believing gap. Knowing and believing are two different ways of knowing a world. And we know up here, we kind
we
of
aren't so sure down here. Yeah.
And so that gap, see, people can say to me, I know he's dead, but I just can't believe it. And I say, yeah. See, they get a lot of validation because what they're saying to me, I say, yes, that is the way it is. And eventually we close. That's the other guy that's in there. That's a great quote, who talks about closing the gap, closing that gap.
Barbara, we could talk forever.
We could.
We're out of time. Do you believe it?
Oh.
Great book for all of us. And as I said, it's radical because it really is pulling back from this sort of medicalized...
the medical model that we and our culture has placed on death and dying and grief and all of it. Barbara Coyne, Coyne, barbaracoyne.com. The book available there. You don't have to like it, but you do have to live it. Thank you for calling my show that day. You're welcome, Lynn, and I do thank you for giving me an opportunity.
And thank you for all the, I'm sure, wonderful work you must do for people who are grieving. Thank you. And you guys, Monday, we will really talk about,
Stuff.
Yeah, and especially all this NSA stuff. I have a spin people might not like, but I talk. We'll talk. Okay, it's a huge and fascinating and scary subject, no doubt. Meanwhile, enjoy your weekend. Toodaloo.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper, Steel City Media, and its advertisers.